Imagine a world where you cared for a stranger's child exactly as much as your own, where you loved the people of distant countries as deeply as your closest friends. It sounds impossible, maybe even foolish, yet 25 centuries ago, a Chinese thinker devoted his entire life to this radical idea, walking thousands of miles to stop wars and begging humanity to simply love one another without exception. Let me ask you a question that might change how you see your own heart. Right now, you love some people more than others, your family more than strangers, your country more than distant lands, and this feels completely natural to you. But what if this very natural love, this circle that grows weaker the farther it stretches from you, was the secret root of nearly all the suffering in the world? What if the cure for war, cruelty, and injustice was simply to love everyone, everywhere, with equal strength? This was the startling question at the heart of one of ancient China's most extraordinary thinkers. Take a moment and feel how strange and how beautiful that possibility really is. It is a question that has the power to quietly rearrange everything you believe about goodness. His name was Mozi, and he lived during one of the most violent and chaotic periods in all of Chinese history. This was an age when the land was shattered into rival states, each hungry for power, each ready to send its armies against the others. Cities were burned, fields were soaked in blood, and ordinary people suffered beyond imagining while ambitious lords chased glory and conquest. Into this world of endless warfare, around the year 479 before the Common Era, Mozi was born, and he would spend every ounce of his strength trying to heal the broken world he found. You and I would have struggled to survive a single year in such a world, yet out of all that darkness rose a voice calling stubbornly for light. What made Mozi so unusual began with where he came from in a rigidly divided society. Unlike most philosophers of his time who sprang from noble families and comfortable lives, Mozi rose up from the common people. Many believe he was a craftsman, perhaps a carpenter or an artisan, a man who worked with his hands and knew the value of honest labor. This humble origin shaped everything about his thinking, giving him a deep sympathy for the struggles of ordinary men and women. While other thinkers philosophized in palaces, Mozi never forgot the sweat and toil of the people who actually built the world. Think of what it means that our greatest teacher of love came not from a palace, but from a workshop. His calloused hands may tell us more than any crown ever could. Because he came from the working world, Mozi valued something that many aristocratic thinkers overlooked, and that was usefulness. He had little patience for elegant ideas that made no practical difference to real human lives. For Mozi, the true test of any belief, any custom, any policy was brutally simple. Did it actually help people or not? Did it feed the hungry, protect the weak, and bring peace to the suffering? This down-to-earth, practical spirit ran through everything he taught, and it set him sharply against the more tradition-bound thinkers of his age. Ask yourself how many of your own beliefs would survive that same simple test. Mozi would want you to measure them not by how they sound, but by whom they help.
To understand Mozi, you have to understand the giant whose shadow he stood against, and that giant was Confucius. Confucius had died just a few years before Mozi was born, but his teachings had become enormously powerful across the land. The followers of Confucius emphasized tradition, elaborate rituals, and a love that flowed in carefully ordered degrees, strongest for family and weakening outward. Mozi looked at this respected philosophy and boldly declared that much of it was wrong. In doing so, he became the first great challenger to the Confucian way and one of its fiercest rivals. It takes real nerve to stand up against the most revered teacher in your entire civilization. Yet that is exactly what this humble craftsman dared to do. At the very center of Mozi's philosophy blazed one magnificent and demanding idea. He called it JIAN, which we usually translate as universal love or impartial care. It was the belief that we should love and care for all people equally without favoring our own family, our own friends, or our own nation above others. Every human being in Mozi's eyes deserved exactly the same concern, whether they were your brother or a stranger in a faraway land. This was a breathtaking vision, and it stood in direct opposition to the ordinary human habit of loving those closest to us most. Pause and let the sheer scale of that demand settle over you for a moment. He was asking human beings to love in a way that no society had ever truly attempted. Mozi arrived at this radical idea through a chain of reasoning that was surprisingly logical. He looked closely at the world and asked a simple question: where does all this violence and suffering come from? His answer was that nearly every evil in the world flows from partiality, from people caring only for themselves and their own. A thief steals because he values his own gain over yours, and a state attacks its neighbor because it prizes itself above others. All conflict, Mozi concluded, springs from this failure to care for others as we care for ourselves. It is a diagnosis of the human heart that feels uncomfortably accurate even today. Look honestly at any cruelty in the world, and you will often find this same root. From this diagnosis flowed his bold and beautiful prescription for healing the world. If partiality is the disease, then impartial care must be the cure, the medicine that could end violence forever. Picture how the world would transform, Mozi urged, if everyone regarded other families as they regarded their own. No one would rob another, for they would feel the victim's loss as their own loss. No state would ever attack another, for it would feel the enemy's suffering as its own suffering. Universal love, he believed, could dissolve the very roots of human cruelty. Close your eyes and picture such a world, if only for a heartbeat. It is a vision so hopeful it can almost make your chest ache. It is the kind of dream that has quietly driven the noblest hearts in every age.
Now, the critics of Mozi raised an objection that you might be thinking of right now. This idea of loving everyone equally, they said, is simply impossible, contrary to human nature itself. How can any person truly care for a distant stranger as much as their own beloved child? It seems to go against the deepest instincts of the human heart. Mozi had heard this objection many times, and he had a powerful and clever answer that reveals the practical genius of his mind. Be honest with yourself, because it is a fair and powerful objection. Even the kindest among us feel the tug of those we love most. This single doubt has stopped many people from ever taking universal love seriously. Yet Mozi refused to let it be the end of the conversation, and his reply was masterful. He answered his critics not with abstract theory, but with vivid, unforgettable examples. Imagine, he said, that you must go on a long and dangerous journey, and you must entrust your family and your home to someone while you are away. Would you choose a friend who cares only for himself and his own, or a friend who cares for all people equally and impartially? Even those who mock universal love, Mozi pointed out, would surely choose the impartial friend to protect what they hold dear. In their own choices, he argued, people reveal that they secretly know impartial care is better. His genius was to meet people not where their theories were, but where their lives actually were. He understood the human heart far better than his critics realized. But Mozi was never content to simply talk about his ideas, for talk alone was not enough. He was, above all, a man of action, someone who believed that philosophy meant nothing if it did not change the real world. And so he built his ideas into a living organization, a tightly disciplined community of followers devoted to putting his teachings into practice. These Mohists, as they came to be called, were not idle scholars debating in comfort. They were dedicated activists, ready to march anywhere and risk everything to defend the innocent and prevent bloodshed. There is something thrilling about a philosopher who refused to stay behind a desk. Mozi wanted his love to have hands, feet, and a beating pulse. This is philosophy with dust on its boots and courage in its heart. Nowhere did Mozi's principles shine more brightly than his fierce opposition to war. He looked at the endless conflicts of his age and saw them for what they truly were, monstrous crimes against humanity. With ruthless logic, Mozi exposed the hypocrisy of the warmongers of his time. If a man kills one person, we call him a murderer and punish him severely. Yet if a ruler slaughters thousands in an unjust war, he is praised as a hero and a conqueror. This twisted logic, Mozi insisted, was a moral madness that had to end. Read that comparison again and feel how sharply it still cuts today. He was tearing the mask of glory off the face of war itself. No one before him had stripped the glory from conquest quite so mercilessly. Mere words never satisfied him, for words alone were not enough to stop armies. He and his followers actually trained themselves in the arts of defensive warfare, becoming experts in fortification and siege defense. Their goal was never conquest, but protection, to make it possible for weaker states to defend themselves against powerful aggressors. If aggression could always be stopped, Mozi reasoned, then aggression would no longer be worth attempting. The Mohists became a kind of ancient peacekeeping force, using their skills to shield the vulnerable from the strong. You have to admire a man who backed his beliefs with real and dangerous skill. His compassion came armed and ready to protect the innocent. His whole movement was built to turn compassion into concrete, protective action. One famous story captures the astonishing courage and dedication of Mozi better than any other. He learned that a powerful state was preparing to attack the smaller state of Song, using a brilliant new siege engine designed by a famous craftsman. Upon hearing this, Mozi immediately set out on foot, walking for 10 days and 10 nights across a great distance to reach the aggressor's court. He wore holes in his shoes and wrapped his torn feet in rags, but he did not stop, driven by his determination to prevent a massacre. His journey alone reveals a man willing to suffer greatly for the sake of strangers he had never met. Try to picture yourself making that same brutal journey for people you had never met. It is the kind of devotion that shames our easy, comfortable sympathies. When Mozi finally arrived, exhausted, he confronted the ruler and the master engineer with a challenge. He proposed a demonstration, a mock battle, fought with belts as walls and small sticks as weapons. Again and again, the engineer attacked with his simulated siege engine, and again Mozi defended, defeating every single assault with his superior defensive tactics. The engineer finally admitted he had one last strategy, but refused to say it aloud. Mozi calmly revealed that the man was thinking of simply killing him, but that it would do no good. Imagine the tension in that room as belts became walls and sticks became armies. Everything in that strange contest hung upon the mind of one exhausted traveler. With quiet brilliance, Mozi delivered the checkmate that saved an entire city. "Killing me will accomplish nothing," he explained, "because my 300 disciples are already standing upon the walls of Song, armed with my defensive methods and waiting for your attack. Even if you destroy me here," he said, "you cannot destroy the knowledge I have already spread." Faced with this, the aggressor abandoned the invasion entirely, and a war was prevented without a single life being lost. It was a triumph not of armies, but of courage, intelligence, and moral conviction. It is one of the most satisfying moments in the entire history of philosophy. A war was undone not by bloodshed, but by wit and unbreakable resolve. That single moment tells you everything about the kind of man Mozi truly was.
Beyond his campaigns against war, Mozi launched a powerful attack on waste and extravagance. He was disgusted by the way the wealthy and powerful squandered resources on luxury while the common people starved. Elaborate funerals, lavish musical performances, extravagant ceremonies, all of these Mozi condemned as wasteful indulgences. Every coin spent on aristocratic pleasure, he argued, was a coin stolen from the hungry and the poor. He called instead for simplicity, frugality, and the wise use of resources to benefit everyone rather than to entertain the privileged few. You can hear in his anger at waste the voice of someone who had known hunger. He could not stomach feasting while children cried for bread. To him, every wasted luxury was a quiet theft from someone who had nothing. This attack on luxury put Mozi once again in direct conflict with the followers of Confucius, The Confucians cherished elaborate rituals and beautiful music as essential to a civilized and harmonious society. Mozi looked at these same things and saw only expensive distractions that drained resources from where they truly needed. Why pour wealth into fancy ceremonies, he asked, when people are dying of hunger and cold? This clash over the value of ritual and music became one of the great debates of ancient Chinese philosophy. It was a clash not just of ideas, but of two entirely different pictures of what matters. One side prized beauty and order, the other prized survival and need. Few debates in history have revealed two worldviews so completely at odds. Some people found Mozi's rejection of music and lavish ritual to be cold and joyless, but we should understand the deep compassion that lay beneath his stern demands for simplicity. Mozi was not against beauty or happiness in themselves, but he could not bear to see resources wasted on the few while the many suffered. Every fanciful indulgence of the rich, in his eyes, was paid for by the tears of the poor. His frugality was not the frugality of a miser, but the fierce compassion of a man who could not look away from the suffering around him. Look beneath his stern words, and you will find a heart breaking for the poor. His harshness was really love wearing a severe and determined face. Once you see that, his stern simplicity begins to look a lot like tenderness. Surprisingly, Mozi also held complex ideas about religion and the will of heaven. Unlike some thinkers who grew skeptical of the old gods, Mozi firmly believed in heaven as a moral force watching over humanity. He taught that heaven itself loved all people impartially and desired that human beings do the same. In this way, his belief in universal love was grounded in his belief about the very structure of the cosmos. Heaven, for Mozi, was not a distant abstraction, but an active moral power that rewarded kindness and punished cruelty. It may surprise you that so practical a man held such a deep faith. For Mozi, however, that faith was the very foundation of his ethics. His universe, in other words, had kindness woven into its very fabric. For Mozi, the impartial love of heaven was the ultimate model for how humans should behave. If heaven sends its sunlight and rain to all people equally, he reasoned, favoring neither the rich nor the poor, neither one state nor another, then surely we should imitate this divine impartiality. The sun does not shine only on the deserving, and the rain does not fall only on the good. In the same way, Mozi believed, our care and compassion should flow to all people without distinction. His universal love was, in a sense, a reflection of the boundless love of heaven itself. There is a quiet beauty in grounding human kindness in the impartial sky above us. He saw our duty to love written into the workings of the world itself. Another revolutionary idea he championed concerned who should hold power in society. In an age when noble birth determined everything, he argued that positions of authority should go to the most worthy and capable people. He believed that talent and virtue, not family bloodlines, should decide who governs and who leads. A worthy commoner, in Mozi's view, deserved to rise higher than an unworthy aristocrat. This was a stunning challenge to the rigid social order of his time, and it reflected his deep faith in the potential of ordinary people. Imagine how those words landed in a society built entirely on inherited privilege. He was daring to say that worth, not birth, should decide a person's place. It was a thought centuries ahead of the world he was speaking to. Consider how much courage it took to preach these ideas in the world Mozi inhabited. He was telling powerful rulers that their wars were nothing but mass murder. He was telling proud aristocrats that a talented peasant deserved their position. He was telling everyone that they should love strangers as much as their own families. These were not comfortable, flattering messages designed to win favor with the mighty. They were bold, disruptive challenges to the entire established order, spoken by a man from the humblest of origins. It is worth remembering that speaking such truths could cost a person everything. Mozi risked the fury of the powerful for the sake of the powerless. He chose the danger anyway, again and again, without ever seeking reward. In the few centuries after his death, the influence of Mozi was truly enormous across China. The Mohist school he founded became one of the most powerful intellectual movements in the land, rivaling even Confucianism in its reach and influence. His disciples spread across the states, teaching universal love, opposing warfare, and defending the weak. For a time, it seemed that Mohism might become the dominant philosophy of Chinese civilization. The ideas of a humble carpenter truly seemed poised to reshape a civilization. History rarely gives ordinary people such a moment. For one bright moment, love itself seemed to be winning the argument.
Yet history took a surprising turn, and the great movement Mozi founded eventually faded away. As China became unified under powerful empires, the ruling authorities favored Confucianism, which supported the existing social hierarchy. Mohism, with its challenging demands and its criticism of the powerful, gradually lost its followers and its influence. For nearly 2,000 years, the teachings of Mozi were largely neglected and forgotten, preserved only in dusty texts. It is one of history's great ironies that so influential a thinker could slip so completely into the shadows. There is a real sadness in watching so noble a movement quietly disappear. The world was not yet ready for the love that Mozi asked of it. An idea as powerful as universal love, however, could never be entirely extinguished. In the modern era, scholars rediscovered Mozi and were astonished by the boldness and relevance of his thought. Here was an ancient Chinese thinker who had argued for equality, condemned war, championed the common people, and preached love for all humanity. His ideas suddenly seemed remarkably modern, even prophetic, speaking directly to the concerns of our own troubled age. The forgotten philosopher was pulled back into the light, and people began to listen to him once more. It is as if his words had been waiting patiently across the centuries for us to need them again. And need them, it seems, we still do. The world had finally grown ready to hear a voice it once let fall silent. Once you really absorb what Mozi taught, it becomes impossible to dismiss him as a mere relic. He looked at a world torn apart by war, greed, and selfishness, the same forces that still tear our world apart today, and he dared to propose solutions so simple and so radical that it still challenges us, that we should genuinely care for every human being as we care for ourselves. His voice reaches across the centuries, asking us the same hard questions about how widely we are truly willing to extend our love. Their questions are not safely locked in the past, but pointed directly at you. They ask how far your own compassion is truly willing to travel. And that, perhaps, is why his ancient words still feel so piercingly personal. There is something deeply moving in the image of Mozi walking for 10 days to save strangers. Here was a man who did not merely preach compassion from a safe distance, but who lived it with his own aching feet and exhausted body. He put his life on the line again and again for people who could offer him nothing in return. In an age of endless talk about morality, Mozi stands out as someone who actually acted, who turned his beliefs into blistered feet and sleepless nights. His life was itself the truest argument for his philosophy. It is easy to talk about loving humanity and desperately hard to walk until you bleed for it. Mozi did the harder thing, and he did it gladly. His blistered feet remain a sharper argument than 1,000 elegant speeches.
Perhaps the greatest gift Mozi offers us is a challenge to expand the borders of our compassion. Most of us draw a circle around the people we love, and we let our care grow faint beyond its edge. Mozi asks us, gently but insistently, to widen that circle until it includes every living person. He does not ask us to love our families less, but to love the whole world more. In a time when humanity is more connected, yet more divided than ever, this ancient message of universal care feels urgently, achingly relevant. That single gentle demand may be the most difficult and beautiful challenge ever offered. To widen the heart is harder than to conquer a kingdom, and yet it may also be the only challenge truly worth devoting a life to. So the next time you feel your heart close against a stranger or harden toward people far away, remember the humble craftsman who walked until his feet bled for love of people he would never meet. Remember that Mozi believed the suffering of a distant child was just as real, just as important as the suffering of your own. He dreamed of a world bound together not by borders or bloodlines, but by a love that refused to stop at any wall. That dream may seem impossible, yet the simple fact that one human being lived it so fully proves that it is not entirely beyond our reach. Let that thought stay with you long after these words have ended. If one man could love that widely, then perhaps in our own small ways, so can we.
Mozi lived more than 2,400 years ago, in an age of chaos and endless war, and though the great movement he founded eventually faded into centuries of silence, the astonishing idea at the heart of his life has never lost its power to challenge and inspire us. He was the humble craftsman who rose to stand against the mightiest thinkers of his age, the man who dared to tell rulers that their wars were mass murder, who told proud nobles that a worthy commoner deserved to rise above them, and who begged all of humanity to love one another without exception or degree. His single revolutionary idea that we should care for every human being as deeply as we care for our own was so radical that people called it impossible. And yet, Mozi answered them, not just with clever arguments, but with his own blistered feet, walking 10 days and nights to stop a war and save a city full of strangers he had never met. He looked at a world broken by selfishness and partiality, and he insisted that the cure was as simple as it was difficult: to widen the circle of our love until it embraced the whole of humankind. If the story of this forgotten philosopher has touched something in you, then let it remind you that the greatest ideas are often the ones that ask the most of us, that true compassion is measured not in words, but in action, and that the borders we draw around our hearts are ours to expand whenever we choose. So walk a little further in your caring than you did yesterday. Love a little wider than feels natural, and remember the man who wore out his shoes for strangers and who taught humanity across all the long centuries that peace begins the moment we learn to love without exception.